Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I am Jill Troderman, your host of Feeding the Family, streaming live on Santa Cruz Voice, santacruzvoice.com. So today we're going to be talking about some really interesting things. I'm going to ask a few questions to start us off. Do humans have a unique connection to cannabis? And if so, can cannabis be considered a plant medicine? Yes is the answer. A big fat yes, according to ourselves, according to recorded history, and according to many peer-reviewed studies. For at least 2,000 years, probably longer, cannabis has been a vital part of humans' lives, from the seeds, the hemp fiber, to the flowers. Yet, for the last 100 years, this versatile and notorious plant has been utterly villainized. But why? There's so many misconceptions about this plant, and I have to share, my first foray into it was a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herrera. People label cannabis as Mary Jane, marijuana, wacky tobacco, and even the devil's lettuce. But today we are in a whole new paradigm. States across the U.S. are making cannabis legal, and the studies do prove it, and people want it as a legal medicine. So today we're going to be talking about cannabis for medicine and recreation with Santa Cruz's own master of cannabis, Christopher Carr.
Thank you for having me.
Hey now, so excited to have you.
Yeah, it's cool to be on this side of the table.
Right? It's always fun to switch roles.
Yes, it is. It is.
So now I get to share a little bit more about you, if you don't mind hanging on there. So for folks who don't know who Mr. Carr is, he's a Santa Cruz-based educator, cultivator, and host of the Cannabis Connection, a radio show focused on cannabis science, culture, and policy. Chris is also a Cabrillo College cannabis guest, a lecturer, a lifelong activist, and a seasoned competition judge, included in High Times, the Emerald Cup, and serving as Cannabis Judge for the California State Fair in 2025. Who even knew? I didn't.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's very cool.
So Chris is into all kinds of really cool things, and he's deeply rooted in the Compassionate Use Act, and he champions cannabis education, equity, and compassionate access across California. And also, when he's not dabbling in this great plant medicine, he jams out as a bassist in a band called Ancestry. And Christopher also is a proud father of two, and he's a loving husband and a fabulous community member. So I'm just really super thrilled to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know. It's super exciting. You're up
Thrilled to be here.
All kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, try my best. Try to keep it busy.
Yeah, but you were in this field when it was kind of dodgy.
Yeah.
Before it was like, hey, it's all peace and love and everyone can use it.
I was on federal airwaves talking about growing and providing medicine to patients pre-legalization. So kind of one of the first to kind of come out of the shadows into the light in a big way. Started on KSCO, AM 1080 in 2015. And in those days, if you were caught with a lot growing in your backyard, there was raids. There was still an interesting time. And that was pre-2018 Farm Bill. So CBD wasn't quite discussed, let alone, right now you can go to a New Leaf and get CBD gummies and, hemp derived cannabis products at any gas station too. You can get them anywhere. But in 2015, we're talking about 10 years ago, a lot has changed. I feel like a year in cannabis is like 5 to 10 years in any other industry as far as policy changes and research and different developments as far as the industry and product creation, value added products. And I think what's important here is to remember, in some ways, like where we come from, and we stand on the shoulders of giants, especially in Santa Cruz is a very deep-rooted place, an epicenter of cannabis culture that not a lot of people realize, that the history of cannabis and domestic cannabis in America has a very strong connection to the Santa Cruz story.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Why is that? We have good growing conditions, or we had advocacy with WHAM, that was
The Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana.
Right?
I think part of it with Santa Cruz was, this is the birthplace of CCOF, Certified Organic Farms. And that policy was written by farmers in the 70s. And I think what happened was the creation of we're on this wonderful like route because I'm a musician as well, and so you go from the Bay to LA, right? And so like Janis Joplin, all these like the Grateful Dead, these powerhouse musicians and players and artists would tour from LA up to the San Francisco Bay Area, but there was a connection here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, just a wonderful place to stop. Just like what drew probably all of us here, or if we're not born here and raised here. I came here, I pilgrimaged to Santa Cruz from the Sierra Nevada foothills. And I think what happened was, we have a unique Mediterranean climate. We have some of the most diverse microclimates in the whole state. We're the second smallest county out of 52 counties in California, but we have like some of the most diverse species of flora and fauna, specifically like bees and pollinators. Like, I know people from UCSC that wrote their whole PhDs on just the biodiversity of Santa Cruz County. And so with that said, we have an amazing bay. And I think part of the roots were a lot of smuggling, a lot of loads of cannabis coming from Asia, Central Asia, or coming from Colombia or Mexico. And our connection with, the harbor and Davenport Landing, and just like, we had a flourishing mercantile, seaworthy business, whether it be fishermen, old Italian fishermen, or, a lot of those people also carried with the fish loads. And those loads in the old days were seeded. And so Santa Cruz was not only a wonderful place in its environment and Mediterranean climate, but it was a wonderful place to unload smuggled loads from abroad. And then you had the university kind of established in the late 60s, and a lot of interesting people like Robert Connell Clark, who wrote his capstone thesis, which became the marijuana botany kind of Bible. And it was a thesis for his degree at UCSC. One of the early UCSC students and scholars was writing about cannabis cultivation and propagation and breeding. And then this is the home of the haze. So there was these brothers in South County that were taking imported flowers that were full of seeds and starting to grow those seeded, bag seed, and select different phenotypes of good things that grew well here. And that became what is now known as haze, and then they also worked in collaboration with this man named David Watson, who was their neighbor. He goes by Sam the Skunk Man. He recently passed away. But before he passed away, I interviewed him, and he was in Corralitos as well and developed skunk, and skunk number 1, and haze and skunk, because of
these are varieties of cannabis.
So if we're going to compare it to wine,
for folks who don't
Merlot,
know, right,
and Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, those are cultivars of grapes, and you can make wine from that specific cultivar. So if we're going to apply that kind of logic to cannabis, what Chardonnay is to wine, haze is to cannabis. It's a very strong building block cultivar that created a many array of hybrid varieties that a lot of businesses and brands were built upon. And what happened was there was a prohibition here in America, so a lot of those people creating these seeds or selecting those seeds and making these population increases of very specific selections, when they were raided, they moved to Netherlands in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is traditionally the most tolerant place for cannabis culture in the world until recently, until the law started changing. And so from almost 50 years, there's these massive seed banks all around. If you go to Amsterdam and you walk the streets, it's almost every street there's a cannabis seed bank or a smart shop where you can get psychedelic truffles and cannabis genetics. And a lot of those genetics came from Santa Cruz, South County.
No way.
Yeah, Sam the Skunk Man fled.
That's a crazy story.
Yeah, fled Santa Cruz because of fear of imprisonment.
For sure.
They found his plants. They chopped them all down. He ran away, but stood, at a distance and watched the police leave. And when he was convinced they weren't around, he went back and found his seed stash and left the country and didn't really come back for a few decades. But he became one of the founding contributors to the biggest seed banks in the world, which were located in Amsterdam. Sensi seed specifically, and he also started the Super Sativa Seed Club. So it's amazing to see that, like, you know, covering this beat and doing this show and meeting all these interesting characters. A lot of them are open to speak with me because I'm broadcasting in Santa Cruz.
Okay.
And within in the, you know, kind of outlaw culture of traditional legacy cannabis breeders, they have a lot of respect for this community because they have a lot of respect for the Hayes brothers. Other great contributors too, like Sam the Skunk Man. There's been many pieces to this puzzle, but also like Wham and Valerie and Mike Corral. And, you know, when she started having seizures as a result of a traumatic brain injury starting in the 70s. So this is all kind of happening around the same era, same time, same generation. They found that her epilepsy or her seizures, her neurological disorder could be kind of regulated and taken care of. She can find some sense of homeostasis by using cannabis and a phytotherapy approach, using a variety of lifestyle changes. She moved to a massive farm in Swanton, and that was like the first Wham Gardens were out. So that now we're talking about north on the one, so North County, Santa Cruz.
We're talking about North County up in the Bay Area, Central California, essentially, near San Francisco.
Oh, I'm saying Swanton Road.
Swanton Road,
it's by Davenport. It's not far at all. It's
right.
where my daughter goes to preschool, so
right.
maybe 10 minutes north of the west side, Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And those original Wham Gardens were essentially to treat her disorder. And when they grew such abundance, they found other sick people. Around that time was the AIDS epidemic. So a lot of people that were suffering from AIDS, and during the AIDS epidemic, everyone was really scared of like, how is this transmitted? We kind of had another version of that in COVID, where it's like we didn't know what was going on. Was it in the air? You know, if you get close to someone or sit by someone, are you at risk? But all these young people, you know, young people in the gay community were dying, and they found a lot of relief with using cannabis. And there's another woman named Brownie Mary, who was an older grandma that would go to the hospitals and provide cannabis-infused brownies to these terminally ill patients. And then they would start laughing again and talking again and having a sense of like community and human dignity. So and that's also like connected to Dennis Perrone. And I walked in and you had Jack Hare's book on the table, and I'm like, I'm in the right place, because these are these are kind of in my eyes, and doing the show over the past 10 years. It's been a decade. We started in 2015. It's been a interesting experience and exercise in humanity and learning about Northern California history, Santa Cruz history, and how it has influenced the world on a global scale. And it's really rooted in treating AIDS, treating epilepsy, treating conditions that at the time there was no treatment.
Right.
There was no
cancer.
solution. Yeah,
right.
Cancer is a big thing now. We heard about the story of Charlotte Figge, this young girl with Dravet syndrome, and that's what really put CBD on the map, was Sanjay Gupta and CNN and Charlotte's Web. That happened around the time I started the radio show. And so like I kind of rode a special wave in history where things were unraveling as far as prohibition and the draconian drug war against cannabis specifically. There's still a lot of things we can speak about with drug policy in America.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I live in the mountains. I just remember the helicopters would fly over, and it was terrifying. It was so low, I could throw a stone and hit the helicopter. And I'd take my kids and run inside, and they were looking for farms, grow farms.
Yeah, and they would jump out of helicopters and arrest hippies or, growers who... If I was...
And not like even a few years ago,
I started the show, it was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, there was
with
segments.
SWAT teams, like with rifles
in Santa Cruz County. And we're a small kind of charmed community here in this Santa Cruz. But think about, Humboldt and Trinity County and like Mendocino. Those were like open, like war zones as far as like the campaign against marijuana planters. It was a big money moneymaker for the DEA, for local law enforcement. So in a way, it's kind of a racket. Any war is a racket. Somebody's profiting on it. So the war on drugs, in many ways, was a way to kind of funnel all these funds and keep that gravy train going, because they were going up against unorganized back to the landers that were essentially UCSC grads, or like that kind of archetype. People that were really interested in alternative lifestyles, interested in living in nature, being off-grid, being self-sustainable. A lot of my broadcast over the decade has been being a voice for the regenerative agriculture movement, which is completely the antithesis of industrial farming, which we see in the Central Valley of Salinas or Monterey County, or even in South County. We are the home of Driscoll's as well. Like, we're the home of certified organic farms, but we're also the home of these massive like brands and corporations that kind of control the gene pool of like what is a strawberry.
Seriously.
Yeah, like people only really understand the flavor profile of a Driscoll's they call them coolers, which essentially is their genetic, engineered strawberry.
Wow.
And in nature, there's so many diverse phenotypes and unique cultivars. So it's fascinating.
Sure. Like cannabis. Now, I always think it was a propaganda thing, right? To suppress the medicinal quality of cannabis. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was why for the last 100 years, the plant medicine of cannabis was suppressed? Was it like pharmaceuticals? Because it is.
Yeah. This is I learned it from this man here. It's a very complex thing, like anything. It's very tied to, but it's money. We're a capitalist society. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, mm-hmm. right? And so there was the end of alcohol prohibition around 80 years ago,
sure.
right? So Al Capone and this huge, temperance movement didn't work. And that's when we should have learned, prohibition doesn't work.
Right.
There's a will, there's a way. If people want, we could talk about, altered states in the human consciousness. That's something we've been dealing with since, the beginning of time. Is we find, icemen and glaciers from 10,000 years ago with hash in their pockets.
No way.
Yeah,
Seriously?
absolutely. And a lot of it
so
is...
my 2,000 years was far off.
It's longer. It's like there was this iceman they found,
wow.
and they had specific tattoos of certain, like practices they would do, like hunting, like tattoos outlining how they would hunt. And then they had satchels full of intoxicating herbs, and in one of the satchels was hashish, resin of cannabis plant that they had rubbed, which is like in India, it's been happening and documented in the Bhagavad Gita and mm-hmm. sacred Hindu texts, in Sufi religion. So in Islam, it's been very documented that there's a whole, the Sufis are these like mystics, and they use it as a sacrament. Even the idea of Jesus and putting the anointing oils on the eyes of the blind so the blind can see, there's biblical references of cannabis, and the idea of the holy oil that Jesus, that was one of his miracles. The blind, he put oil on the eyes and the blind could see. Well, they're saying cannabosum is in the oil, and certain Hebrew translations of cannabosum is, they thought it was calamus or calamus, which is like a reed that grows in that area, in that terroir. But certain interpretations of the translation could be cannabis. Cannabosum is cannabis. And so if you have cannabis in lipid-rich oil and you put that on the eyes of someone with glaucoma, like take it back to biblical times, they don't know glaucoma is inflammation and you can't see when you have inflammation, but you put a cannabis-infused olive oil and it transdermally gets into the area that is inflamed, and then it's no longer inflamed, then you have blood flow and then you can see. So Jesus's miracles could have been related to cannabis, and that brings us to like health and wellness. Like my mother has glaucoma, and this has been the first show I did was I met Mike Young in KSCO in July 2015. And the first time we shook hands and said, "Hello, I'm Christopher. Hello, I'm Mike," he pulled me aside and says, "I have really bad glaucoma. Can you help me with some cannabis?" So there's always been this like wellness component or healing component to this conversation that was completely omitted in the beginning of Prohibition. What happened was there was a lot of people rating people for for alcohol, and now alcohol was legal, so they needed something to go after. And this is also around like the Dust Bowl era. I think about Grapes of Wrath and the Great Depression. There was a lot of people coming from Mexico. This has been a pattern for over 100 years that were willing to do work for cheaper and work harder and longer because it was better than working in Mexico. But there was all of these people from Oklahoma and from Middle America due to the Dust Bowl that were being displaced, that were also struggling and starving and looking for work. And in a way to demonize people of color coming from Mexico, they found an enemy. And it's similar to Nixon. He couldn't go after the Black Panthers directly, but he could go and start the Controlled Substances Act of 1972. And it was a way to go after the Black Panther Party and go after the counterculture movement.
Right.
Well, take it back to the 1930s. They were trying to find a way to go after people of color that would take farming or labor jobs from white people coming to places like California. That's the whole idea of the Joad family and Grapes of Wrath. John Steinbeck is also from the 831. And it was a racist intention, and it was also a way to
henceforth Mary Jane, right?
Yeah, that's why they changed the name.
Spanish.
They used
to slang it to make it sound kind of dirty or something.
Yeah,
right?
To slander. Absolutely, that was
slander it.
Yeah, they were trying to make it race driven. Wow. They were trying to put, because cannabis had been in the American pharmacopoeia for since the Betsy Ross, the first flag was made of hemp.
I understand that.
Yeah, the Declaration of Independence is written on hemp paper. Hemp for victory. There was this whole idea that actually the original colonies, instead of paying taxes with money, you could pay it in a crop of hemp because it was such a useful crop. They could make uniforms. They can make paper. The seed is called the salmon of the soil. It is so rich in omega-3s, it's better than fish oil, but you can grow it in 90 days. And this brings me to my other point.
Yeah, this is so exciting because I think I'm going to have you back because I have like 1,000 questions I want to ask.
Well, there's this other piece.
We only have 1 hour of it.
I know, William Randolph Hearst.
Okay.
So this is a Bay Area tycoon responsible for yellow journalism. He pretty much started a war of 1812. I'm not sure don't quote me on the exact date, but there was a war with Spain and the term yellow journalism was essentially manufactured consent. So getting the population so riled up on a false flag operation that they were all willing to go to war. And he owned the Chronicle. He owned pretty much all of the print media of this area. The Hearst Castle is in California. And he was like filthy rich and really good at making money. Well, what happened was all of his investments were toward timber and printing his newspapers on trees. And then they found out in Popular Mechanics, there's a magazine, published in the 30s, Cannabis, the next billion-dollar crop. And they were talking about mechanized ways to decorticate, using machines to process the hemp in such a way that it can become fiber, that it can become paper, that it can become, Henry Ford made a car out of hemp and took an axe and he hit a regular car, made a huge dent on the hood. He took another axe and hit it on his hemp car and broke the axe. So you can manufacture like hempcrete. You can make houses without wood. You can make flame retardant structures out of cannabis. So William Randolph Hearst realized all of his interests, his investments were now, to grow a timber harvest took 90 years. To grow the same amount of hemp, 90 days.
Yeah, why didn't he pivot to that?
He could have, or he could have just said, call it marijuana and demonize this crop.
Right.
And the other piece was DuPont Industries.
Yeah, with the oil, right?
Yes.
See,
so there's these the billionaires of the day, essentially colluded, and that was the beginning of cannabis prohibition. And it was an easy sell because American society and an American zeitgeist and consciousness was very us versus them. And so by pointing out the scourge of Latino workforce coming from Mexico, and then in the South, it was considered, the Viper Rooms, the jazz, like Louis Armstrong.
Right, yeah, the jazz clubs.
Was all about cannabis, and Muggles is a famous song and composition he wrote. And so a lot of white privileged people would love to go dance and have a good time there. But then they said, oh, marijuana, the scourge of America. You know, if your wife, you know, smokes it once, you know, she's going to be taken by a scary man, you know, and it being, i.e., read between the lines, very racist propaganda.
1,000%.
Yeah. And so they said, you know.
And that movie that they made too.
Yeah, Reefer Madness. Yeah. So it literally was a mass propaganda campaign that worked.
Yeah.
And people got behind it. And because of the temperance movement failing and alcohol, like they wanted to get back to drinking. And the other piece too is like a lot of the people that were using cannabis, it made them work longer for cheaper. And it also kind of opened up, you know, think about Louis Armstrong and what his contribution to jazz was. He changed the game. He opened new, you know, cannabis is a kind of mind expanding substance depending on how you use it or what type of varietals you're into. But, you know, that also led to, and brings us back to Nixon, you know, people thinking critically about their government and thinking critically about their relationship with their worker, the employer, you know, and critically about their role in society.
Yeah, and our access to medicine. Let's just say it.
Totally.
They took that away for 100 years.
It would undermine a lot. Like, for example, you were like, why didn't William Randolph Hearst pivot?
Right.
He was kind of already 100 years invested in timber.
Right.
And same with DuPont. They were like, we're all oil. We're all in on oil. It's sometimes not the better thing to do. It's like, hey, we could probably make, you know, big pharma is built on oil too.
It is.
And so so cannabis was a disruptor. It would undermine all these special interests. And they leveraged racism in America to sell it. And it continued until some people over time were able, for example, the Jack Herer, you know, the Jack Herers of the world and in recent Santa Cruz history, you know, people thought critically, for example, like the medical system in America doesn't work for everyone. And especially if you're a gay person in the late 70s, in the 80s and early 90s, you know, you weren't really treated like everyone else. Mm-hmm. The Harvey Milks, you know, there's a long, amazing story here. And that's the interesting thing about cannabis culture is it's kind of intrinsically woven into, you name it, mm-hmm. You know, gay rights, local politics, you know, farming regulations, certified organic farms. Think about the Grateful Dead and their contribution to music. A lot of the early cannabis genetics were all exchanged on Dead Tour. So it's people following the Grateful Dead all over Northern America were setting up these shakedown streets outside the concert.
Really? Okay.
And exchanging buds that had seeds in them. And that's how you got...
Is that shakedown, like shaking the seeds out of the...
You know, I don't know if but that's a funny thing that you mentioned that, because I'd never even thought about the parlance there, like the double meaning.
Right.
But the idea is like, you know, these were kind of impromptu counterculture gatherings and villages that would erect around Dead shows that would change. You know, they were on tour constantly for decades. And a lot of the cannabis community felt comfortable kind of being out and open, similar to people being gay and being out in San Francisco or Santa Cruz. I think it's just an amalgamation, a constellation of variables that kind of led to, despite prohibition, a proliferation of a community and a culture, and they could continue to evolve despite prohibition. And it was just a matter of time until it kind of unraveled. I think every prohibition is doomed to fail from the start because mm-hmm. we're adults and we should have the freedom to choose in how we treat ourselves, whether it be for wellness and health, but also like, you know, freedom to seek altered states, whether that be breathing techniques, cannabis, coffee, you name it. You know, there's a lot of ways to alter consciousness, and it's kind of part of the human experience.
It is, yeah. And just, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, I want to talk about that human connection on a physiological level.
Yeah.
Why do we have cannabinoid receptor sites on our cells?
I love it.
Like, this is super exciting. All right, we'll be right back with Christopher Carr. I'm your host, Jill Troderman, streaming live on Santa Cruz Voice. And you are with me on Feeding the Family.
You.
Yoo-hoo!
Cannabis at your neighborhood Hook Outlet dispensary.
Nice.
We have locations in Santa Cruz, Capitola, and Watsonville. At each Hook Outlet, you will find unmatched low prices on the Hook's unparalleled selection of top quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlets are Santa Cruz County's best source for the finest cannabis at the lowest prices. See for yourself. Stop by any Hook Outlet and say hi. We'll see you there. HookOutlet.com.
Okay, folks, we are back. Thank you for being here, Mr. Christopher Carr.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is such an exciting conversation. Of course, there's like thousands of hours worth of history and politics, economics, hemp we can get into.
Yeah.
I wanted to dabble into the health field a little bit. And during the commercial break, I was sharing with Christopher that a family member of mine was into cannabis because his child had cancer. And his name was Dr. Lester Grinspoon. And I was aware of that because I married into this family and he was the uncle and he treated his child. Unfortunately, the boy passed.
Yeah.
But it really changed his life as an academic.
I think he
And here he was like this
documented that,
high-level
too.
Harvard professor, super strict, straight arrow type of guy with the tweed
Yeah.
and the penny loafers.
Yeah, like a traditional. Can you mute number one?
Yeah.
There we go. Better. Much better.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just an echo because I'm not using that mic.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay. So to me, that was some of my foray into the medicinal
Pretty
part.
special, yeah.
You know, because we all had the exposure of going to the Grateful Dead shows and
Sure.
the recreational
This
aspects
is
of
important.
cannabis.
Yeah, it's
But
a
to
great
me, this
segue.
is- what I'm really fascinated is the endocannabinoid system that we have. So clearly,
Yeah.
we are aligned
We've
with this-
evolved for.
with this.
Yeah, exactly.
It wouldn't be in our systems, and it's also in the
Yeah.
animal world too.
That's correct. Yeah. So
And so with Lester Grinspoon, I don't know if you want to tip.
I'll try to jump off from there. I think what happened was the research of anecdotal observation, like Lester speaking about his son, his child, and his kind of documenting things using the scientific method. But I think it wasn't until mid 60s in Israel, Dr. Raphael Meshulam, who identified THC as the active cannabinoid that provided the psychoactive effect. He also identified CBD cannabidiol, and through those discoveries, kind of was able to trace where these cannabinoids, these compounds found in the resin glands of the flower, also in minor parts of the leaf and the stem, where do these things interact? And what he discovered was not only do we have lock and key receptors that will take phytocannabinoids, i.e. cannabinoids from a plant, but that those receptors, we evolved with them. They're part of our design and our evolutionary construction in the DNA. And so when we run and have a runner's high, a lot of people say it's a dopamine rush or serotonin release, but what we're experiencing is anandamide, which is an endogenous human cannabinoid we create as a reward. And ananda, the name there is Sanskrit, and it means bliss. So we are kind of getting high on our own supply whenever we do something that we need to do to survive, i.e. procreate, orgasm. There's a lot of endogenous cannabinoids happening. There's an exchange. Anandamide is present when we run and when we sweat and perspire and burn calories. It's also like part of our gut and flora and fauna. There's a huge amount of endogenous cannabinoid receptors in the gut, and a lot of people with like irritable bowel syndrome or those kind of gut health issues find a lot of relief from using cannabinoids. And so what happens is when cannabis is introduced to the body, it's in a way like vitamin THC or vitamin CBD. It is supplementing parts of our endogenous cannabinoid system that may be dormant or may not be getting enough. A lot of autoimmune issues are something going on with our body, or it could be a cause. For example, my brother grew up with like really bad allergies, and that's a sign of the body overreacting. And so what I found with regulating the endogenous cannabinoid system with a plant like cannabis, it helps us maintain and steward homeostasis, and that can be simply translated to like a state of balance. Mm-hmm. And for example, like when we have a seizure, the neurons are misfiring. So there's an imbalance in the central nervous system. Or if we have issues in the peripheral nervous system, Parkinson's, or that's neurologically related. But if we had, like, for example, Rick Simpson is a famous name in the cannabis space. He had melanoma, so his epidermis cancer. We've seen a lot of amazing, he treated his cancer with a full spectrum cannabis oil. And the endogenous receptors in the skin were able to kind of trigger apoptosis, which is programmed cell death of the cancer.
Right. I have a question on, so we have endogenous, internal, the anandamide
is a human cannabinoid we create.
So, like, for instance, our
responsible
bodies,
for the runner's high.
Right. Like, our bodies produce a lot of things like fats and proteins, our bodies, but there are essential fats that we have to eat. And
Yes.
same with proteins.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Right? Like,
Yes.
essential amino acids that our body doesn't manufacture. Like vitamin C, we have to eat. Our body doesn't manufacture that, where our body will manufacture vitamin D. So when your body doesn't manufacture enough of the anandamides,
yes.
do you need to then supplement with this plant medicine?
100%.
Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. And there are, John McPartland is a physician, and he has a theory, and he's written a couple white papers about cannabinoid deficiency syndrome.
Wow.
And that there's this whole,
amazing.
whole like realm and like library of autoimmune deficiencies or diseases that he believes are a symptom of 80 years of prohibition and having a cannabinoid deficiency. And so 100%, like, that's why, and I want to be very clear, to supplement your body with cannabinoids, specifically from the cannabis plant, does not mean you are getting high.
Yeah. Can you address that? Because there's a lot of association of, clearly, for people who have smoked cannabis, you can get pretty high, especially nowadays. They really can hybridize these plants to have high THC.
Yeah.
So where do people, because people who might want to try this plant medicine are like, I don't want to get high all day and
totally
have work to do.
Yeah.
So does the THC and the CBD offer different medicinal qualities, or
yes.
how do we address that?
Yeah. So like we kind of
like sleep is an important thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's
all these things I want to address.
So the plant, and my specialty or my realm of interest in this beat was very tied to the actual, because I grew up in a agricultural region near South Lake Tahoe off of Highway 50 called Apple Hill. It was a lot of fruit growers, apples, pears, you name it, but also wine makers and vintners. So a lot of vineyards and beautiful, beautiful rolling hills of grapes. And so, like, I've been very interested in agriculture and providing the best conditions for cultivation. But what we found is, just like we have different varietals in those hills of Apple Hill, of Fuji apples, Golden Delicious, you name it, or in wine, the Chardonnays and the Tempranillos and the Pinots, cannabis has different families, and the different families of the cultivars produce different profiles of cannabinoids. And so what I would recommend, and traditionally, if we look at, like, say, the Hindu religion, they were very interested in eating cannabis, raw, either it be charas, where they rub flowers and the resin glands collect on the skin, and then they rub that off, and you can put that into milk and make majun or make products, like, and they used it around Shiva worship. It was the sadhus. It was these, like, holy people in their community that were kind of the stewards of that garden, and using it for wellness, and also using it for religious reasons, for Shiva worship. But I would say, like, what we're excited about with the unraveling of prohibition is we have an opportunity as people to cultivate more and to have an exchange of genetics, and to kind of open up the cannabis genome is way bigger than the human genome. I interviewed Kevin McKernan, who was in Boston and Cambridge studying the Human Genome Project, and he started getting into cannabis when Massachusetts and things were changing there, and totally changed his career path to studying medicinal genomics, looking at the genome of cannabis specifically for medicinal application. and they throw a really great event called CanMed, where it's a gathering of all the physicians from all over the world speaking about their research in cannabis specifically.
Yeah, and there are some research study sites like the endocannabinoid. There's real legit science. It's happening now. Well, finally, right?
And if you're in academia, to become a professor, to become a PhD, to earn these higher echelon, prestigious degrees, you have to publish research.
You have to. Yeah.
And the most, I just interviewed a group
for
called
credibility.
Yeah, I just interviewed this group from the Cancer Playbook, and their team of researchers published only about cannabis, and they've been publishing for, like their whole lives. They're career scientists. And, you might have maybe a dozen people read your work once it's published, and there are people in your field or adjacent. But all of these cannabis white papers that are being published, it's like that goes viral, which is unheard of in academia, to publish a paper and to have it within the first week, millions of people have read it. And
this is a new turn, because I'm sure like 20 years ago, people were like, oh, that's a quack.
Totally.
You would lose your career.
Or you lose your life. Yeah, medical professionals don't learn about these things in medical school because they're worried about their license. They're worried about the war on drugs, or, we have a lot of interesting, scary things to worry about, especially in these like hard to, become credentialed career paths, whether it be a doctor or a professor. I guess they have tenure eventually, but not all of them do.
But they lump cannabis in with, opioids and like some street
Schedule
drugs.
I. Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's like a different scene.
As a federal government, it's still considered no medicinal value.
Wow.
Highly addictive. It is regulated on a federal level like meth,
right,
like cocaine, like heroin, like, everything Schedule 1 is essentially like going to kill you.
Seriously.
And so it's a big cognitive dissonance.
It is. And I just wanted to share, Christopher, that, for instance, recently in 2025, so this year,
wow,
in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, which is a reputable journal, there is a study that says the role of endocannabinoids in physiological processes and disease pathology. So that was a comprehensive review where they did find that cannabis can work with, like you mentioned, neuropsychiatric disorders, chronic pain, nausea from chemo. I think that's probably a classic. People know about that. Yeah,
that was Prop 215, the Compassionate Use Act in California in 96.
Right.
That was kind of the kind of textbook case study was, oh, you're a cancer patient, let's write you a recommendation. Now you can go get cannabis.
Right.
And those were like the early days of retail and dispensaries and collectives and caregivers. So a lot of the early cannabis farmers were either related to or connected to a cancer patient.
Yeah, and then like you mentioned before, glaucoma, epilepsy.
Yeah, epilepsy.
And schizophrenia and sleep.
Yeah, sleep, insomnia is a big one.
That's a huge thing. And I was just reading a study that
Anxiety.
said 70% of all youth are using cannabis. But could that be? That seems like a lot of kids out there who are...
I don't know about kids. That's the key thing.
Adolescents or young adults.
I think if people are really... I know for a fact we've treated...
why do they have sleep issues?
Pediatrician. Yeah, we have... in my experience with WHAM, and WHAM's a unique group native to Santa Cruz, that would, when people are so medically bankrupt and they have no other option, they would come to us.
They would.
And a lot of the pediatric cases I interacted with through it was mostly Valerie Corral working directly with really terminally ill kids. But the formulations were these full spectrum cannabis oils, and there was CBD for the daytime, so like very high concentrations of cannabinoids to relieve the inflammation, to relieve nausea.
So the CBD is a part of that's like the non-high
non-psychoactive.
Is that what we call it? Psychoactive, right?
Psychoactive, and theoretically the psychoactive is a very broad term.
Okay.
So like, for example, drinking coffee is a psychoactive experience, but I'm not high. It's caffeine. It's changing my neurological...
You can drive a car, but you might drive fast.
Sure. But the high, when I say psychoactive, I'm referring to like the feeling of being high.
Right.
And especially with a child, if they're that sick, a little high may not be the worst thing for them because they're so uncomfortable, they're so ill. But we would use CBD for the daytime just so that they're more lucid.
Fair.
And then high THC in the evening, because it does have, and I'll get to the reason why these things work. There are two types of cannabinoid receptors in our bodies. And in some parts, whether it be the peripheral nervous system, there are higher concentrations. Let's just call them CB1 and CB2, cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2. In the peripheral nervous system, we have, more concentrations of one, and then in the central nervous system, we have more concentrations of the other. And so like the CBD would be good during the day because it would kind of target those receptors that were not intoxicating and would provide a lot of the relief in the central and peripheral nervous system without providing that intoxication side effect. And then at night, one of the side effects of THC is drowsiness. And so it can be helpful to actually switch it up. CBD might actually be stimulating. It depends on everyone has a unique biochemistry, and like how you interact with cannabis is really dependent on your biochemistry. So it's not like a panacea, take one and call me in the morning, which is what a lot of our expectations are when we go to the doctor. Cannabis is a phytotherapy. It's a plant therapeutic, and we need to find a specific formulation for each patient. And that doesn't really fit into the American medical money machine that is big pharma, right? They just want something that they can patent, charge exorbitant amounts of money.
Cookie cutter.
Yeah, and then the insurance companies cover it and everyone makes their billions. Or, if you empower people and they can learn, what works for them specifically, they can essentially grow their own pharmacy in their backyard and make value-added, tinctures, oils, formulations to treat their ailment. The reality is it's just really hard for someone when they're suffering from cancer to do all that.
For sure.
And that was a lot of the work of Prop 215 was communities coming together and collectives looking out for the best interests of specific patients. And so I worked at collectives. My foundation professionally in cannabis was working on the floor with sick patients and walking them through a consultation and finding a regimen that would work for their specific illness or ailment. And everything you said today, it's kind of scratching the surface because there's a lot of little things too that people have had amazing results with, whether it be, the epidermis, skin, psoriasis, even as unique and sensitive as like erectile dysfunction or intimacy with things, you can find some, really interesting formulations that can help you. And that's all, when you think about wellness and health, it's a very complex and interwoven conversation.
It is.
It's diet, it's exercise, it's lifestyle, it's stress, it's do you socialize, do you get we're social creatures. There's all these things that can affect you, and you need to find a wonderful balance. And just like that in the world, that's happening on internally too. And what I found is cannabis is a wonderful kind of mother's milk. There's a story, and I've recently had children the past 3 years, just bearing witness and being a father, but also seeing my children interact with their mother. And I had this Farmer Tom on the show, and he was raised by a nurse, single mother in the late 50s, early 60s. So she would work nights, and he was alone. And he talked about his first cannabis. Like a lot of my shows introduce, how did this plant come into your life? Like, what's your first experience with this plant? And he speaks to his his whole life he grew up on formula, and he had someone else raise him. Childcare, kind of like a lonely, sad childhood, but his mom did what she could to provide, got him to that place in his life where he was going to high school and doing well in life, but he tried cannabis for the first time. And he said, it felt like this warm feeling in my head that went into my whole body. Wow. And it was like the first time he had ever experienced mother's milk.
Oh my gosh.
Like it comforted him. And it's because in colostrum, when you first feed your baby, the amount of human cannabinoids in the milk, and if you've ever nursed a baby or seen babies, they get milk drunk, and the eyes go in the back of their head, and they get milk. There's this idea of being milk drunk. That is that's a cannabinoid high that they're experiencing. And it's responsible. We evolved for that, to give that to our children so that they can learn the suckling connection to the mother, so that they can latch and grow and feed. And it's like, it's literally the mother's milk of nature is the relationship between a cannabinoid and a cannabinoid receptor.
That's so beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. And we only have 2 more minutes, but I also I want to, can we extend it? Because I want to talk to you about being a dad and how do you address this with kids? Because your kids are little.
Sure.
But we don't want our kids, smoking a joint before they go to school.
No.
So there's like a nuance with all of these things, like what we're sharing, right?
Yeah. It's
sophisticated and
I was a co-chair.
And simple at the same time.
Yeah, well, I have a background in this locally, a co-chair of community prevention partners with United Way Santa Cruz. So I was like a leadership role in harm reduction for youth. So,
okay, good.
So yeah, like not only am I a father and raising 2 littles, but I think the whole thing is talk it up with your kids.
Fair.
And then if you're a cannabis user, lock it up.
Yeah, keep it real.
Keep it real. Be honest.
Like wine, yeah.
And be honest, like kids don't want to do what their parents do. I mean, that's a pattern I've watched in this community. And so there's a lot there to discuss, but I try to lead by example and be very outspoken and very upfront with everybody.
Good. That's really good advice. So I'm going to sign us off, and I am Jill Troderman. My website, really quick, is SantaCruzHolisticNutrition.com. Please find me. Chris, what's your website?
Oh, Can Connect, CANN Connect.org. And just look for us on all the socials, Cannabis Connection Show at The Cannabis Connection. I'm Christopher Carr.
Christopher Carr, we're demystifying this great plant medicine.
Yeah.
This is a really exciting topic.
Yes, it is.
I feel like we're on the cusp of a whole new century of discovery.
Yeah, we got to catch up. We've had 80 years of darkness, so we got to bring it out and unravel this prohorrition.
Right.
One conversation at a time.
One conversation at a time. Well, this has been brilliant, and thanks again for joining.
Fantastic.
All right, signing off from SantaCruzVoice.com, your host, Jill Troderman. All right, we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.